Reasons to vote and the right to vote. The League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis, next on City Corner. Hi, I'm Sarah Thompson and welcome to City Corner. You've probably heard it said time and time again that your vote is your voice. But despite that, there are people who are not registered to vote, some people who do not choose to exercise the right or privilege to vote. And so we kind of wanted to focus today's show on a voting 101 to kind of go through the basics of registering to vote, the reasons to vote, as well as some hot topics around voting. And we couldn't think of a better guest to do that than the League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis. They've been here before, but it has been some years, so we brought them back in studio to do that. I'm joined by Louise Wilkerson. She is the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis, and it's so great that you're here. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So the interesting thing is it's not 2020, and we'll probably have to have you back next year. But as I said in the intro, I think it was important for us to kind of get this topic going and talking about voting, some of the basics, as I said, of voting 101, get into some of your stances and positions on things.
Sure.
But before we do, can you remind people of League of Women Voters and what the organization does and who it is?
All right, the League of Women Voters grew out of the 72-year effort to get women the right to vote. It grew out of the women's suffrage movement. And so it so happens that 2019 is the 100-year anniversary of the Metro St. Louis League, as well as the League of Women Voters of Missouri. And there's an interesting story about that. So at any rate, there was I guess it was in March of 2019, there was a national convention here in St. Louis. It was the National American Woman Suffrage Association, which was an organization that worked for 50 years, advocating for women to get the right to vote. So that was their Jubilee convention in St. Louis at the time. And the president, Carrie Chapman Catt, was a dynamic, motivating, captivating speaker, and she gave this stirring address, and toward the end of it, and she said, "And let there be a League of Women Voters," and that just motivated the crowd and so forth. So that was in, I'm going to say like March 27th or so. So, indeed, she electrified the crowd so much that the women of St. Louis, who at that time belonged to, it was called the St. Louis Equal Suffrage League. So essentially by October in Missouri, there was a meeting, and there was the formation of the League of Women Voters of Missouri at the time, and Edna Gellhorn, a St. Louisan, was elected the interim president at that time. So that was in October 1919. And I mean, those women were busy back then. They didn't pause for anything. And so the very next month, the St. Louis Equal Suffrage League ceased to exist, and those members became the League of Women Voters of St. Louis.
Okay.
And so they immediately, even before they transitioned to become the League of Women Voters, they had been holding what was called citizenship schools throughout the city of St. Louis, and these were held in public school sites in the evenings, and you can't believe the number of people that attended. What they were trying to do was to get women ready to vote,
right.
So that they would be knowledgeable about citizenship, voting, their rights, the issues. and so forth.
And we even have some, I know some photos that
Yes.
women voters, and I want to
Yes.
throw those up just to show sort of this vast history. It's interesting in preparation, and we'll put those up on the screen for you to look
Okay.
at. I mean, so we're looking at League of Women Voters. I think a lot of people are familiar when they see images for representing
Yes.
women's suffrage movement.
There were a number of marches
Yes.
throughout the U.S. at the time, and typically the women would wear white.
Yes. And so we've got, as you were mentioning, the centennial for League of Women Voters for St. Louis and Missouri celebrating this year. And then for the 19th Amendment, women granted the right to vote. That was August 18th that it was ratified, August 18th of 1920. And so as you mentioned, next year will be a very big celebration. I think what's so interesting is how the League, too, has developed from photos that we're looking at from over 100 years ago.
Yes.
And to sort of what it is now as this nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that really is a huge, huge resource
Right.
Here in
Now,
St. Louis.
that's a photo of an interesting event. It was held June 1916, and it was called the Golden Lane, or the Walkless, Talkless Parade, if you will. So that took place in St. Louis. The Democrats were having a national convention in St. Louis at the time, and so the women wanted them to include women's suffrage in the platform. And so what they did was to line both sides of the street from the Jefferson Hotel, where most of the convention goers, delegates, were staying. They were all men. So their convention was being held at a structure called the Coliseum. It doesn't exist. I don't know where it was. But anyway, these 7,000 women came to St. Louis and lined both sides of the street from the Jefferson Hotel to the Coliseum, and they didn't say a word. They were just dressed in white, with yellow sashes and signs of votes for women and these yellow parasols. Wow. And so the men had to walk, and it made an impression. And guess what? They did include it in the platform. They did include women's suffrage in the platform. So, and we kind of celebrated that in 2016.
Did you?
Downtown at the St. Louis Public Library in the park across the street. We had a great celebration.
And as you should. I mean, I think, again, as I mentioned, we sometimes take for granted,
yes.
you know, the privilege and the right to vote. Were you going to say something about
Well, that was Edna Gellhorn, the previous photo, and she was a St. Louisan, and she worked tirelessly to advance, to make advancements with respect to women and children and so forth, and she insisted that African American women be included when the St. Louis League first formed. Now, it wasn't full inclusion. I'll explain about that a little later. And then there was a picture of Virginia Minor, and there's a bust of her in the state capitol. She dared to vote or to try to register to vote. She was denied. She had the backing of her husband, and her case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Of course, sadly, the Supreme Court denied her the right to vote, and she did pass away before the 19th Amendment was ratified, but she was truly a courageous woman and a fighter and a pioneer.
Yeah, thank you. Well, this is, I mean, just such, I mean, the history of women's right to vote, and obviously with the League of Women Voters here in Missouri and St. Louis, so rich, and I appreciate you sharing some of that.
Pleasure.
When we cut to, we've got a lot of pictures that really reflect the work that you're doing now, and I know you're a very, very busy person. I want to kind of go to the basics. I mean, let's just talk about the simple registration to vote. You do this at a lot of events.
Yes.
What people, if they are 18 and older, they should be registered to vote.
That's
Where
right.
do they go to do this?
Okay, so there are a number of places they can go. Certainly they can go to their Board of Elections in the, quote, county, unquote, where they live. And of course, in St. Louis City, you know, St. Louis City is a county unto itself, so they could go down to the Board of Elections, 300 North Tucker Boulevard in St. Louis, to register to vote. Also, when they interact with a state agency such as the Department of Motor Vehicles or the Department of Social Services and so forth, a lot of people don't know this, but those agencies are supposed to offer voter registration services. That's due to a 1995 National Voter Registration Act. And of course, Missouri was not complying with that very well. And so there was a lawsuit, and the league was one of the plaintiffs. So they've kind of taken some corrective action. Also, at a number of libraries, you may be able to register to vote. You can also call the league office, and we'll be happy to help. There are at a number of events in the community, the organizations hosting those events will have voter registration available.
Okay, and
So,
I want to, while you're talking, I want us to show some photos because you do such great work in the community that as we're talking about this, I want people to be able to see that as well. So we're going to run some of that. So yeah, we can, and I think going to your website, I have to say, your website is so comprehensive too that people can find out a lot of information about the work that you do. So we're looking at some photos here of events where you're out at fairs, helping register people to vote, getting your message out there. I want to ask you about something that continues to come up, and I think there is confusion about it, which is voter ID. So when people are going to be voting this year, next year, where does Missouri sit right now with what identification you need to have and not have when you vote?
So as your audience probably knows, there was a photo ID law passed in Missouri in 2017, I believe. And the league had a problem with the way that it was implemented. In other words, we did not believe that the state allocated enough funds to inform the electorate of the change, what was required, and so forth. I mean, there were some efforts, but we felt it was insufficient. So we were part of a lawsuit that was filed on that issue. We felt that the state left too much to be done and essentially assumed that organizations like the league would do what they were supposed to do, and that is get out in the community and inform people. So that law said that in order to vote, you had to have one of 4 types of state-issued photo ID: driver's license, passport, a military license, and so forth. Now, as a result of the lawsuit, there was a court ruling last year that put those requirements on hold. So now, as far as we know, until there's a court ruling, as far as we know right now, if you don't have one of those 4 types of government-issued photo IDs, you can also vote by showing some of the alternative forms that used to be acceptable, like an unpaid utility bill, a rent receipt, a student ID from a university or college that happens to have your photo on it, and so forth. We're going to have to cut to a break, which I hate to cut you off, and I apologize because you're running through time, but we're going to finish up when we come back from our break. So we've got some information there for you on the screen. The League of Women Voters, as we're saying today, I mean, it has such a rich history, and there's a lot of great work that they do. They're also a wonderful resource for the very basics of registering to vote, learning about the vote, what's on the ballot, and just voting in general. So head to lwvstl.org or call the number on your screen. But we have so much to talk about, but we're going to have to take a break, so stay with us. We'll be right back right after this. There's more STL Live. Not STL Live, there's more City Corner right after this.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes, and you can do it here. So what are you waiting for? Just go to the site.
Operation Wonder Park is a go!
There's nothing more powerful than imagination. But don't just imagine. Use STEM to change the world.
Who's with me?
It's gonna hurt tomorrow.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
Hi, I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome back to City Corner. I started off the first segment reminding people the saying that they've heard over and over again, which is your vote is your voice. And so we wanted to focus this show today on voting and really looking at the work that the League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis does, not just in helping people register to vote, but getting them informed about what's on the ballot each year, that there's an election year, and other topics. And so I'm joined by Louise Wilkerson. She is the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis. Again, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure.
And you have such a wealth of knowledge, both historically about women's suffrage and about the League, as well as currently just so much what's going on politically. I want to kind of move back into, I hope we've kind of covered the basics where people can learn about how to register to vote. They should be registered to vote. The reasons to vote. If you had to tell people, I mean, it should be a natural thing. It's your right, and because it's your right and it protects your preferences. But what do you say to people when they say, why should I vote?
Well, it's the one way that you have of expressing your pleasure or displeasure, your approval, in terms of those who are serving in office, and it's the one way you have of weighing in on issues. Your vote does count. And, I can get up on a soapbox in the middle of Forest Park and hold forth, but unless I vote,
yes,
my opinion, I may be able to influence some people, maybe. But that's the one and another important thing. If we value our democracy, voting is the fundamental cornerstone of that democracy. It's the informed participation of the citizens. And to the extent that citizens do participate, our democracy grows stronger. When people don't vote, or they're denied the vote, or the vote is suppressed, our democracy is significantly weakened. The other thing is, and people have heard it, but it's true. It may sound like a cliche now, but it is so true. So much blood was shed over the right to vote. And, it took women 72 years to get the right to vote, and then to have people now just cavalierly say, oh, well, it's, but at any rate, if we value our democracy, we've got to vote.
What do you feel when you're out? I know you are out so much at events and just meeting people and obviously interacting with your members when it comes to youth voting. I mean, I see on the one hand a lot where there's this really passionate base of young people that once they get to college, that's one of the first things they do if they're moving to a new city and register there. And then there's other times with the youth vote that it might not seem that it's coming along. What's your take on that?
Okay, it's very important. And I would say a couple of years ago, we had some new people to join the League. And guess what? One reason why they joined was they wanted to get into registering youth. And so we have a whole group that does that. They go into the high schools during the course of the school year, and they register the seniors, those who are at least 17 and a half. Now, you can register when you're 17 and a half. You can't vote until you're 18. But we go to a number of high schools in St. Louis City, and we collaborate with some other organizations like Project Power to the People for that. St. Louis County, St. Charles County, we believe in young people voting. They definitely should form the habit of voicing their preferences. We had a wonderful poster contest statewide, high school students, And the student who won the poster contest, and I should have brought a photo of it, but anyway, is, let's see, she's, what is it, in high school in Lafayette High School,
Okay.
and that's local. And it's a fantastic poster.
I think, is it one of the ones that, it might be one of the ones that we have the image. Is it for, is it a face of a young woman?
Yes.
For it? Yeah, I think we'll pull that up in a second, but I think we
Yes,
do have
and
that
so
one as well.
that's been
great.
distributed throughout the state.
Fantastic.
To be shown in all the high schools. So yes, we believe. Oh, and young people can belong to the league too.
Okay.
At 16 years old.
16.
They can become full-fledged members of the League of Women Voters.
That's great. That's really great. And we'll pull up, be sure before we close the show to pull that up. I want to emphasize too that when we say the League of Women Voters, it's a nonprofit, nonpartisan political organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. And it also influences, and you've alluded to this, public policy through education and advocacy. And
Yes.
so there's so many topics. I mean, we could go through gun control, voter suppression, Amendment 1. I mean, there's too much
Right.
probably for this show to kind of tackle today. But is there anything that sort of stands out? I feel like the big thing right now, obviously, is looking at voter protection and voter suppression. But is there any topic when it comes to Medicaid expansion, census, that you want to, the minimum wage here, that you want to allude to, just one of those that you feel is pretty vital and pretty important for people to keep on their radar?
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. We were successful in advocating for and campaigning for Amendment 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very important. People should keep an eye out for attempts by some in the state legislature, in the General Assembly to, oh yeah, that's the poster that won.
There we go.
And at any rate, so, to get on the ballot some measures that may weaken Amendment 1. It didn't happen this past legislative session, but it might. Minimum wage, we were successful in fighting for that. It'll become $12 an hour by 2023. The league does not believe that's enough, but it was what we felt would pass in Missouri. I think people should be on the lookout for advocating for not necessarily a minimum wage, but a living wage. We need to progress to that. Mm-hmm. We need to never take our eye off the ball in terms of the Voting Rights Act that was gutted by that Supreme Court decision, Shelby versus Holder. We need to continue to advocate for the repair of the Voting Rights Act. Much of the voter suppression going on in the nation is because of that Supreme Court decision. And the Congress has failed to do what it needs to do to repair it and get it back to its full strength. That is, states would have to get pre-clearance before changing voting laws. That is so important. Then, of course, the census, we're gearing up for that. Believe it or not, the Equal Rights Amendment for women has not been passed and ratified. It was first proposed, I think, now I might be wrong on this, but around 1972, 73, and it hasn't happened yet. I think we need one more state to ratify it, but we believe that women will not truly be equal legally until it is passed. Medicaid expansion is so important in Missouri. We're talking about matters of life and death, and we're concerned about what's going on in rural Missouri, where some hospitals have closed, clinics have closed, and we just don't understand why Missouri has not expanded Medicaid.
Well, I think it's too important, as we mentioned too. I mean, you're working side by side in the organization. As I mentioned, it's nonpartisan. So there's Democrats, Republicans, Independents, women who cover all bases. Obviously, Metro St. Louis is this area. Yes.
We have men too.
Yes. Oh, okay.
And the president of the Kansas City League is a man. So we welcome men
Good. And that's a great segue. Thank you for clarifying that.
We are now co-ed.
Okay. All right. No, that's a really great segue to how upcoming events and how people can get involved. I'm going to put up a full screen graphic because I know you're busy, but we've got some events coming up. You, not we, but the League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis has some events coming up. So we've got this informational, you're going to be at Green Tree Festival in Kirkwood. That weekend.
And we will be doing voter registration at our booth and giving out a lot of information about these issues, about the census and so forth and so on, and how people can help.
Okay, and September 28th is a big day. This is a library voter registration day where you're working really across all counties to help register people to vote. Tell me a bit more about this.
Yes, in all the libraries. Well, National Voter Registration Day is actually September 24th, but that's in the middle of the week, and that's not convenient, so we're doing ours on that Saturday. So we will have people at all the libraries in St. Louis City, St. Louis County, many of the libraries in St. Charles County and Jefferson County and Francis County. Between 10 and 2 to do voter registration. If people need to update because they moved or there's a name change, they can come on in and we'll get it taken care of.
Okay, that's great. And I know that we weren't able to include on that graphic that you have a centennial gala in November.
Yes.
But as we have the website information on there that people can go for more information. I really appreciate you being here. I mean, I love that when you go to the site for the League of Women Voters, it says creating a more perfect democracy.
That's our game.
And it's the work that you're doing continues to do that. You mentioned men can be involved. Lastly, who can get involved and with League of Women Voters?
Anyone. 16 or older, and even if there are kids who are under 16, they can become associates. Associate leaguers. And and we're reaching out now. Focus coming from national headquarters is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we invite all people, no matter what their background, there's something you can do. We have a job for you in the league.
Thank you, and thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.
No, you have just such a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be here today. So thank you.
You're
so welcome. And thank you at home for watching. We've got some information there for the League of Women Voters. You can reach out, go to their website. There's so much information there that's really going to help you understand what's happening in the political process when it comes to voting. It's LWVSTL.org, or call the number on your screen, 314-961-6869. And thank you again for watching City Corner, and thank you for keeping it right here on STL TV, Experience St. Louis.